The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical frequency at 6:06 a.m., the same pitch that would echo through Katie Morrison's skull until lunch, merciless and constant as rotor blades. She counted medication vials in the oncology supply room at Cedar Creek Medical, each one a small cylinder of hope or borrowed time, her hands moving with the same precision she'd once used to count pulse points in a desert extraction zone. 12 years. 3 tours. 2 Purple Hearts. The past lived in her fingers now, muscle memory that wouldn't quit even when her mind tried to bury it. The faded 75th Ranger Regiment patch was still there, sewn into the jacket lining she touched every morning before shift. Her fingers found it the way they always did, a ritual older than the hospital badge clipped to her scrubs. Katie Morrison kept her head down in the oncology ward at Cedar Creek because it was easier than explaining why a military officer was folding patient charts like a civilian nobody. The other nurses didn't ask questions. They asked better, they didn't ask at all. Room 340B held Sergeant Chris Mendoza, transferred from Walter Reed 3 weeks prior with a chest wound that refused to heal and the hollow stare of a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. Katie had reviewed his chart 17 times. Not because policy required it. Because she recognized the pattern of his injury. Because she knew exactly what kind of operation left that particular type of scar. Because Mendoza had replaced her in Tikrit 14 months ago, and he'd taken shrapnel doing the job that got her buried by the Pentagon. The morning rounds began at 7:11 a.m. sharp. Dr. Pierce led the procession of residents, medical students, and nurses like a man accustomed to authority, the kind that doesn't need to be earned, only inherited. His suit cost $3,000. His watch cost more. His presence made the air pressure change, though not in the way it should. Katie stood near the medication cart, her charting meticulous, her posture deferential, her eyes never quite meeting anyone else's. Just a nurse. That was the story she lived. Mendoza's mother was in the room. Mrs. Letitia Mendoza, 68 years old, with hands that trembled as she held her son's discharge paperwork and eyes that had already buried him once. Katie had spent 30 minutes with her the previous evening, explaining the treatment protocol in language that a retired teacher from Georgia could understand. Chemotherapy dosages. Infection markers. The realistic probability of remission at stage 3. Mrs. Mendoza had listened with the attention of someone who'd already lost a husband to silence. Katie was mid-sentence when Pierce entered. The next infusion is scheduled for Tuesday, Mrs. Mendoza. That gives your body 48 hours to process the current dosage, Anne. Excuse me. Pierce's voice cut through the explanation like a scalpel through tissue. He held up Katie's chart, pages fluttering like he was displaying evidence at trial. These notes are concerning. Katie's hand stilled. Her breath didn't change. That was control. The dosage you administered on Monday, Pierce continued, not looking at Katie but performing for the residents clustered behind him, does not match the dosage I prescribed. According to these, he waved her notes, you gave 70 milligrams when the order was for 50. The room temperature didn't drop. The monitors didn't stop beeping. The world didn't pause. But Katie felt the shift, the way predators sense blood in water. He was moving. Stage 1 of his assault, the public humiliation, the kind that spreads through a hospital ward like infection. Katie kept her voice level. My notes reference the pharmacy verification from 5:27 a.m., Dr. Pierce. That order was for 70 milligrams. The pharmacy records will confirm it. Your notes. Pierce smiled, and it wasn't a real smile. It was the smile of a man who'd already decided she was lying. Your notes say what you wrote, doesn't it? And what you wrote and what you actually did might be 2 very different things. He turned to Mrs. Mendoza. Your son is being monitored very carefully. We'll need to adjust his protocol given this dosage discrepancy. Letitia Mendoza's hands began to shake. Not from Katie's alleged error. From fear. From the weight of hearing that her son's care, her son's life, hung in the balance of whether a nurse had made a mistake. Katie watched the old woman's face crumple, and the instinct to correct it, to explain, to defend herself rose in her chest like a second heartbeat. She swallowed it down. I understand, doctor. Katie's voice didn't waver. Deferential. Accepting. A nurse accepting correction from a superior. I'll verify the pharmacy orders for the next treatment cycle. Pierce nodded, satisfied. He turned to Mendoza, already forgetting Katie existed. We'll see how you respond to the adjusted protocol, Sergeant. You're doing well. The rounds moved forward. The residents followed. The room returned to its mechanical rhythm. Katie finished her charting. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She didn't retreat to a supply closet to fall apart. She simply noted the time, 7:34 a.m., and moved to the next patient, her hand steady as surgical steel. But that wasn't the worst part. By midshift, she discovered the fabricated write-up on the unit board. Pierce's handwriting, clinical and precise. Nursing Documentation Incident Report, K.R. Morrison. Date, yesterday, 5:22 a.m. Incident, administration of non-prescribed dosage without physician verification. Recommendation, retraining required. Immediate supervision mandatory. The word sat there in black ink, turning her into something she wasn't. Katie read it once. Read it again. Her jaw tightened, that small muscle near her temple flexing once, twice, then settling. No one was watching. She didn't need to perform composure. The composure was real. She scanned the rest of the oncology ward. Nurses moved through the hallway with the practiced avoidance of people who'd been warned. Shelley, who usually grabbed coffee with Katie at the station, suddenly found reason to be in another department. Marcus, the senior resident, didn't make eye contact when he passed. The silence wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated. Pierce had made calls. Pierce had asked the right questions in the right way. I'm just concerned about patient safety with this nurse, and I know you probably didn't realize, and the ward had reorganized itself around Katie like an immune system rejecting infection. The break room cleared the moment she sat down at 2:15 p.m. Katie didn't flinch. She unwrapped the sandwich she'd brought from home, turkey, no mayo, the same lunch she'd eaten for 5 years, and she ate it with the same methodical precision she used for everything. Chew. Swallow. Move. The trembling wasn't fear. The trembling, if there was any, was something else entirely. Something that came from deep down where the Phoenix Air Force Base felt like yesterday and Tikrit felt like home. At 3:48 p.m., Dr. Pierce walked past her charting station. He wasn't moving fast. He wanted her to see him. He slowed, and Katie felt him stop behind her. You write fiction better than you practice medicine. That was all she said. Her voice was ice-smooth, the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. She didn't look up from her charting. She didn't raise her voice. She simply completed her note, patient shows improvement in white cell counts. Continue current protocol, and then stood up, her movements unhurried, and walked away from him without waiting for a response. She didn't need to wait. She already knew what his face looked like. Mendoza called her into his room at 4:51 p.m. He was sitting up, chest wound packed properly, the surgical site healing with the kind of efficiency that suggested good genes and good care. You know the story about the blue ghost? He asked, casual, the way patients talk to nurses they trust. Katie paused. That name. That call sign. It lived in files marked classified and in the memories of 12 people she'd extracted from a Tikrit stronghold that wasn't supposed to exist. No, she said quietly. Medic we had, back in Tikrit, Mendoza continued, staring at the wall. Captain, I think. Nobody ever said her name. We just called her the Blue Ghost. She went into a place she wasn't supposed to go, came out with 12 hostages that the Pentagon said were already dead. 12 people who should have been bones by then. He paused. His voice dropped. She took a round in the shoulder getting them out. Kept moving anyway. I replaced her after that. After she got pulled for medical clearance. Katie's hand found the patch in her jacket lining. Her fingers traced the embroidered lettering. 75th Ranger Regiment. The legend she wasn't supposed to be. They ever find her? Mendoza asked. No, Katie said. And she walked away before the question could go any deeper. Katie brought the evening medications at 6:45, when the fluorescent panels had already begun their slow flicker into dimness and the hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and something else, the particular staleness of recirculated air that had been breathing through the same vents for 12 hours. Mendoza was conscious, his eyes tracking toward the doorway before she even entered, and his face shifted into something lighter than it had been that morning. The chest wound was healing cleanly. The surgical site was pink, not angry. Small victories in the aftermath of shrapnel. She hung the .4 bag and checked his name on the wristband, her movements precise and methodical, the kind of efficiency that left no room for conversation if a patient wanted to offer none. But Mendoza was the kind of patient who needed to talk about Tikrit the way some people needed water, like it was the thing that kept him tethered to anything resembling solid ground. You know what I heard about the blue ghost? His voice carried the casual weight of someone who'd been thinking about this story all afternoon, saving it up. Katie's hand paused on the foredrip for exactly half a second. Not a flinch. Not a reaction. A pause like the natural rhythm of checking vital signs. They called her Al-Shaba al-Zaka. That's what the insurgents called her. The Blue Ghost. There was this compound in Jolan, outside Fallujah, 12 hostages, 4 of them kids, and she went in during a sandstorm with a fire team that didn't exist on any official manifest. No body armor with a unit patch. No call sign on the radio. Nothing. Just went dark and came back out with all 12. Katie adjusted the dressing on his chest wound, her fingers moving with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this exact motion 10,000 times. The gauze was clean. The drainage normal. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper. That's just a story. No, Mendoza said, and his eyes found hers with the intensity of someone who'd been looking for this answer his whole deployment. That's classified. That's the kind of thing they erase from the records and then erase from the people who did it. She saved the life of a ranger medic in that basement, the guy who became my predecessor, and then she vanished. Just disappeared. Like she never existed. He paused, watching her face. Command doesn't erase you unless you did something they can't acknowledge. Something that breaks the rules so hard they have to make you a ghost just to keep it quiet. Katie's jaw tightened once, a single muscle contraction that came and went like a heartbeat. Her hands continued their work. The 4 was secure. The monitor showed steady rhythm. Everything in the room was exactly where it should be except her composure, which had become something like the surface of still water, perfectly calm, hiding everything underneath. Get some rest, Sergeant, she said, and she was turning toward the door when his hand caught her wrist. I'm not asking you to confirm anything, he said quietly. I'm just saying I know what it looks like. What it feels like. Being invisible while you're standing right in front of people. His grip was gentle, but there was steel underneath it, the steel of someone who'd learned to read people in situations where reading wrong meant death. Whatever she did, whatever happened in Tikrit, she was a good soldier. That much is documented in every way that matters. Katie looked at his hand on her wrist, then back to his eyes. She didn't pull away. The medication will help with the pain. If you need anything, use the call button. She left before he could respond, her boots whispering against the linoleum, and behind her she heard him settle back into the pillow, accepting the silence as its own kind of answer. The routine dressing change came at 8:15, after the shift change when the unit had that strange quiet that came in the hour before evening settled into night. Katie brought the sterile tray herself, unwrapped the old gauze with movements that belonged to muscle memory more than conscious thought, and began the careful process of assessing tissue healing and drainage patterns. This was the work that lived in the space between thought and action, where hands knew what eyes needed to confirm. The gauze came away darker than it should have been. She noticed it in the same moment she felt the warmth of the drainage against her fingertips, warmer than normal saline or plasma should be, darker than the pale yellow that indicated clean healing. Her eyes narrowed. She reached for the fresh dressing, but her hand paused before opening the sterile package. The wound underneath the old gauze was weeping something that looked like rust-colored water, and when she applied gentle pressure with a sterile pad, the bleeding accelerated instead of stopping. "Sergeant, can you feel this?" Her voice had changed. The timid nurse was gone. It had been replaced by something else, something with command weight built into the consonants. Mendoza's eyes snapped open. "Yeah, I feel." He stopped because his eyes had also found the color of what was soaking through the fresh pad, and in that moment they both understood the same thing. There was something inside that chest cavity that shouldn't be bleeding, and it was doing it anyway. Katie's hand moved toward the call button, but her mind was already 3 steps ahead, running the diagnostic tree like she'd been trained to do by people who'd taught her how to survive in places where survival was measured in seconds. Arterial bleed. Undiagnosed. Weakened tissue from the original shrapnel wound. She'd seen it before, seen it in a basement in Tikrit where a translator had coughed blood into his own hands while insurgents kicked down doors 3 stories above. Mendoza's monitor began to accelerate. Katie hit the code button and the sound that came out of it was an electronic shriek that would have brought the entire unit running, except that the next thing that happened was Mendoza's chest moving in a way that chests weren't supposed to move, his back arching off the bed as something ruptured behind his ribs. Blood bloomed across his hospital gown like flowers opening in terrible fast motion. Not dripping. Fountaining. The crash cart was 2 rooms away, and the resident who answered the first code button was a first year who'd only ever seen bleeding that came from veins. This was different. This was arterial spray that followed the rhythm of his failing heart, and Katie was already moving, not running, not panicking, but moving with the fluid precision of someone whose body had been trained by war to make decisions that kept people alive when time had become a countdown. She grabbed the scalpel from the supply tray without breaking stride, and the blade was already crossing the line between authorized and criminal before anyone in the room understood what was about to happen. The motion was smooth, practiced, muscle memory reaching back through 7 years of invisibility to grab hold of training that was supposed to stay classified. She cracked his sternum in one motion, the sound like a branch breaking under winter weight, and her fingers plunged into his chest cavity while blood spilled across her wrists like war paint. The resident who entered the room in that moment was named Collins, and he'd been prepared for a lot of things in his first year of medicine, but not this. Not a nurse wrist deep in a patient's open chest, holding an arterial vessel between her thumb and forefinger like she was working from muscle memory instead of protocol. He made it 3 steps into the room before his stomach made a decision, and he vomited into the corner, his entire body rejecting the sight of the organized chaos that Katie had turned the emergency into. Katie didn't look at him. She didn't look away from Mendoza's open chest and the pulsing vessel she was clamping by hand. "Suction," she said, and her voice was command now, not request. "Clamps. Page cardiothoracic. Move." Collins moved, or tried to move, or stood there shaking while Katie held the line between Mendoza's heart and exsanguination. She could feel his heartbeat against her fingertips, feel the rhythm that meant he was still there, still fighting, still present in his own body. It was exactly like the basement in Fallujah, exactly like holding a translator while the world exploded above them, exactly like every moment she'd spent keeping people alive in places where staying alive was the only victory that mattered. 3 minutes. For minutes. Her fingers had gone numb, but she didn't let go. She couldn't let go. This was a man who'd looked her in the eye and seen her ghost and decided it mattered, and she was not going to let him bleed out while wearing a name that wasn't even hers. The cardiothoracic surgeon arrived at 4 minutes and 30 seconds, moving with the calm of someone who'd seen the impossible turned routine. Katie held the vessel until his hands took over, and only then did she step back, her scrubs painted red, her hands shaking for the first time that evening, except they weren't shaking from fear. They were shaking from the release of adrenaline, from the aftershock of having moved through combat medicine in a place that was supposed to be safe. Dr. Pierce arrived 3 minutes later, stepping through the ICU doors with his presence preceding him like the pressure change before a storm, and when he saw Katie's blood-soaked scrubs, when he saw the sutures in Mendoza's open chest cavity, when he understood that an oncology nurse had just performed an emergency field thoracotomy without authorization, his eyes lit up with something that looked like opportunity. The room was already dead silent, but his smile made it deader. Mendoza's chest split open like a door swinging on rusted hinges. Katie didn't wait for the crash cart screaming down the corridor, didn't wait for the resident to process what was happening, didn't wait for anyone to tell her what she already knew. The spurting arterial bleed was a language she spoke fluently. Survival rates with this injury, for minutes. Maybe 5. She grabbed a number 10 scalpel from the supply tray in one motion. The blade sang as it moved through air, muscle memory taking over, her hands moving with the terrifying fluid precision of something that had done this before in places the Pentagon kept locked behind classified seals. Ribs cracked under the pressure of her palm. The sound was like dry wood splitting in a fireplace, loud and final and committed. Blood. So much blood. It pooled in the valley of his chest cavity like a dark mirror reflecting nothing. The resident in the corner made a sound, a wet, gagging sound, and doubled over into the trash bin. Katie didn't register him. Didn't register the 2 nurses frozen in the doorway. Didn't register anything except the spurting vessel and the clock ticking silently in her head, 1 minute down, 3 to go. She thrust her bare hand into the open cavity. No gloves. No hesitation. Her fingers found the vessel, the subclavian artery, the source of the hemorrhage, and clamped it with the kind of pressure that came from holding lives together on stretchers rolling toward helicopters. The blood stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Clamp. Now. Her voice had changed. Lower. Sharper. Cut from a different material than the one that had asked for permission in break rooms for 3 years. One of the nurses moved. The other didn't. Katie worked wrist-deep in Mendoza's chest cavity, her left hand maintaining pressure on the arterial bleed while her right hand reached for a satin sky clamp someone was pressing into her palm. The metal clicked. The pressure held. Blood loss arrested. O2 sat climbing already, 78, 81, 84. The ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm, steady, reliable, alive. Get me suction. Get me 2 units of O negative. Get me a surgical pack. She said it like a command. Like someone accustomed to being obeyed in spaces where hesitation cost lives. The resident was still vomiting. Katie didn't look at him. She worked with the precision of someone who had trained for 18 years and lived through 2 tours and held the line in a Tikrit stronghold while people screamed around her. Her hands were steady. Her breathing steady. Her voice steady. The only sign of the operation happening in her nervous system was the slight tightening at the corners of her jaw. 30 seconds of this kind of work was forever. Mendoza's eyes were open. Confused but open. Alive and aware. Katie held his gaze for a moment, just long enough for something to pass between them, and then she was back to the work, her fingers maintaining that perfect pressure while sutures went in around the clamp, securing what nature had failed to protect. 3 minutes. The blood loss had stopped at 2 minutes and 47 seconds. She knew exactly when because she always knew. Because this was what Captain Catherine Morrison did before she became just a nurse folding her hands in break rooms and accepting humiliations with a flat stare. The door burst open. Dr. Pierce stepped through like he owned the room. His presence made the air pressure change. The stethoscope around his neck was crisp and white, pristine, professional, unused. His eyes went to Katie's blood-soaked scrubs, to her bare hand buried in Mendoza's open chest cavity, to the arterial clamp holding a life in place, and his smile expanded like a wolf's mouth opening. Get her out of there. He wasn't yelling. That was the terrible part. He spoke in the tone of someone watching an opportunity materialize in real time. She's practicing medicine without a license. Remove her now. Katie didn't look at him. Her hand didn't waver. Patient coding. Undiagnosed arterial bleed. Subclavian artery. I'm maintaining pressure until we can get him to the OR for proper repair. I said remove her. Pierce was already pulling his phone from his pocket. His fingers moved with the same precision as Katie's, the precision of someone who had trained for something, though what he had trained for was the weaponization of institutional power. The security officer in the doorway took a step forward. Katie raised her free hand. Not aggressive. Just a signal. One more step and I'm going to need a lawyer and a trauma surgeon simultaneously. Your choice. Pierce was already dialing. She heard the beep of the phone connecting, heard him say, "This is Dr. Marcus Pierce at Cedar Creek Medical. I need to speak with the chief nursing officer immediately. There's a situation." He paused, and his smile never wavered. An unlicensed individual is currently performing emergency surgery on a patient in the ICU. This is assault. This is practicing medicine without a license. I want her badge pulled before this patient leaves the operating room. Katie didn't move. She didn't flinch. Her hand maintained the clamp, her eyes stayed on the vessel, her mind occupied entirely with the work that had to be done. In trauma medicine, pain was information. In this moment, the information was that a man's life depended on the steadiness of her hand, and steadiness was something she had built over 18 years in places where hesitation was a luxury nobody could afford. Pierce was on his second call now. "This is Dr. Pierce. I need you to contact the State Medical Board. I have a report of unlicensed surgical intervention at Cedar Creek Medical. The physician present is an RN without surgical credentials performing invasive procedures." He was walking away now, pacing the hallway outside the ICU room. "I want documentation filed today. I want this on record before she finishes." The resident had stopped vomiting. He was staring at Katie with an expression that looked like awe and horror in equal measure. By the time they moved Mendoza to the operating room, stable, vitals climbing, a life preserved through 4 minutes of work and 18 years of invisible preparation, Pierce had already called the hospital's attorney, 2 board members who owed him favors from cases that had been settled quietly in the dark, and had drafted an email to Katie's nursing school references. The words were carefully chosen, the insinuation surgical. "We're reviewing an incident involving Catherine Morrison from your 2009 cohort. Have you ever observed clinical instability? Boundary violations in medical settings? Excessive risk-taking?" He waited for responses he already knew would come. Nobody wanted to be questioned by a hospital attorney. Everyone would hedge. Everyone would distance themselves. Katie emerged from the operating room 4 hours later. Her scrubs were clean now, changed, but she could still feel the blood under her fingernails, still feel the pressure of the clamp in her palm, still feel the weight of the moment when she chose to act instead of defer. 2 security officers were waiting at the nurse's station. Not aggressive. Just present. The universal signal that her presence was no longer voluntary. "Your badge, please." The guard was young, uncomfortable, reading from a script someone had handed him. Katie reached for her locker. Her hands moved with the same precision as they had in the ICU. She pulled out her personal items, a change of clothes, a photo of a place she would never acknowledge, the faded 75th Ranger Regiment patch sewn inside her jacket lining that nobody had ever noticed because nobody had ever looked closely enough. The guard scanned her badge. The beep was quiet and final. The red light on the door lock changed to green. Access revoked. The system processed her exit with the efficiency of a door closing on a life that had been temporary all along. They walked her through the unit during shift change. 12 nurses in the hall. 12 sets of eyes that didn't meet hers. The one she had trained looked away. The one she had covered for looked at their shoes. The one she had saved came back later, she would hear about it, and whispered their gratitude in forms that couldn't be traced, couldn't be attributed, couldn't be used as evidence. Dr. Pierce watched from his office window on the 3rd floor. His phone was pressed to his ear. He was already calling in another favor, already making sure that no hospital would touch her name, already sealing the door behind her with the kind of thoroughness that came from knowing how institutional power worked and being willing to weaponize it without hesitation. The cardboard box in Katie's hands was absurdly light. 18 months of work distilled into the space of a showbox. She carried it through the parking lot at 4:08 p.m. on a Thursday, and the Savannah heat wrapped around her like something alive, pressing down with the weight of humidity and endings. That evening, she used her chaplain volunteer badge to get back into the hospital. Security didn't stop volunteers. Nobody watched volunteers. She made her way to the laundry room, where the industrial washers hummed their metallic song and the smell of bleach hung in the air like a ghost with institutional power. She pulled her blood-stained scrubs from the cardboard box and began folding them. Not aggressively. Precisely. Military sharp creases, each fold a small decision, each decision a kind of goodbye. The blood had oxidized to a dark brown. Under the fluorescent light, it looked like rust, like time passing, like consequence taking physical form. Each crease was a funeral for the life she had tried to build in the margins of invisibility. 3 years of being just a nurse. 3 years of swallowing humiliation. 3 years of keeping her head down while the world spun around her with no idea who was standing in its center. She set the folded scrubs on the counter, metal shelving that had held 1,000 scrubs folded by 1,000 people, and she reached inside her jacket. The patch was faded now, old, the edges worn soft by time and concealment. 75th Ranger Regiment. 3 years of Tikrit embedded in green thread and faded cotton. She touched it once. Just once. The way people touch things they're saying goodbye to. Then she walked out of the hospital, past the security desk, past the ambulance bay where a patient was being wheeled in, past the waiting families in the lobby with their worried faces and their ordinary concerns. The Savannah humidity hit her like walking into warm water. The sky was darkening toward evening. Thunder rolled across the city like artillery from a war that nobody here had fought. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what was about to walk through those hospital doors. That evening, Katie stands alone in a hospital laundry room. The fluorescent lights cast everything in sickly white. Blood stains her scrubs, Mendoza's blood, mixed with her own from where she'd cracked her knuckles against the sternum spreader. She folds each piece methodically. The fabric still smells like antiseptic and copper. Each crease is deliberate, ritualistic, the way soldiers fold flags. She's folding her identity away. Layer by layer. The scrubs go into a canvas bag marked for biohazard disposal. Her badge, the one that said Katie Morrison, RN, she leaves on the folding table. No resignation letter. No goodbye email. Just the badge, sitting there like a surrender flag. The room is empty except for the industrial washers humming behind her, their rhythm like the sound of a heartbeat slowly flattening. She doesn't cry. She doesn't rage. She just folds until there's nothing left to fold, then walks out without looking back. 3 days passed like a held breath. Katie slides her volunteer badge through the card reader on the ICU entrance at 6:51 p.m. on a Tuesday. The badge still works, Pierce hasn't thought to revoke volunteer access yet. The evening shift is skeletal, 2 nurses, a resident, and a charge nurse buried in charting at the desk. Nobody looks up. The hospital corridors at dusk move slower, the overhead lights casting shadows that stretch like bruises across the tile. Her boots make almost no sound. Muscle memory takes over. 17 years in the army taught her how to move through spaces without disturbing them. She reaches Mendoza's room, 340 RB, and through the glass partition, she sees him awake for the first time since the emergency. His chest is wrapped in gauze, and the 4 lines run like spider silk across his pale arms. His eyes are fixed on the ceiling, and the heart monitor beside his bed traces out a steady, beautiful rhythm. Sinus rhythm. Normal. Alive. She pushes the door open. Mendoza's head turns, and for a moment, his eyes go unfocused, like he's looking at a ghost. You. His voice cracks. You're the one who, he tries to sit up, winces, grips the bed rail. Where have you been? I've been asking for you since I woke up. They keep telling me you don't work here anymore. They removed your name from my chart. They told me you weren't cleared to. His breathing accelerates, the monitor beeping faster. Tachycardia. Stress response. What happened? What did they do to you? Katie steps closer, her hand instinctively moving to his vitals. BP monitor, O2 sat reading 96, heart rate climbing to 108. She watches the numbers. "You're okay," she says quietly. "You're healing. That's what matters." That's not an answer. His jaw tightens. I remember the blood. I remember thinking I was dead. I remember someone cracking my chest open like a clamshell, and then there was this voice, a woman's voice, saying something about vessel clamps and that we had maybe 6 minutes before I went into cardiac arrest. "That was you." "That was," he stops, studying her face as if he's seeing it for the first time. Recognition flickers behind his eyes. Something shifts. The way she moved in that operating room. The way her hand stayed steady when everyone else was falling apart. He's seen that kind of calm before. In Tikrit. In a stronghold on fire. Before he can speak, the door to the adjacent isolation room opens. The transfer patient staggers into his doorway, a man in his 60s, thin, with surgical scarring visible on his exposed forearm. He's supposed to be resting. The guard assigned to him, a young Marine with a sidearm, looks up from his post but doesn't move. Hospital protocol, the refugee is not a threat. He's here for cardiac evaluation, transferred from an Atlanta facility, and his medical chart is flagged as monitored but not restricted. The man's eyes drift across the ICU unit until they land on Katie. His body goes rigid. The color drains from his face. His mouth opens, and the sound that comes out is primal, a scream in Arabic that echoes off the tile, Al-Shaba al-Zaka. Al-Shaba al-Zaka. The blue ghost. The words keep coming, pouring out like blood from an open artery. Tikrit. Fire. 12. You took 12 from the stronghold. The bullets didn't touch you. They said you were a ghost. They said you were a jinn sent to drag us to hell. He's thrashing now, pulling at his full line, his monitor screaming with arrhythmias. Al-Shaba. Al-Shaba al-Zaka. The ICU erupts. Nurses rush in, hands reaching for sedatives. The charge nurse calls a code. The Marine escort stands abruptly, his hand moving to his belt, his eyes locked on Katie's face with sudden, terrible comprehension. Mendoza tries to sit up, but the movement tears at his fresh incision, and he falls back with a cry of pain. The monitor beside his bed screams. Blood begins seeping through his gauze. Katie moves toward him instantly, her hands already reaching for fresh dressing supplies, but then she stops. Because the Marine escort is pulling something from his tactical pack. It's a file folder, heavy with weight, sealed with wax stamps and classified markings. His hands are shaking as he opens it. The 15th of November, 2004, he reads aloud. His voice is barely steady. Operation Phantom Fury. Tikrit, Salah ad-Din Province. He flips through pages, his eyes widening with each one. Extracted personnel, 12 hostages, including 2 interpreters and a British Special Air Service liaison. Operation Commander, Captain. He stops. His jaw works silently. When he speaks again, his voice has dropped to something reverent, something terrified. Captain Catherine Morrison. 75th Ranger Regiment. Valor under fire. This is a DD Form 1577C. This is a military decoration citation. Sir, this is... Dr. Pierce pushes through the crowd. His face is already red, already working through the calculation of how to spin this, how to dismantle it. That's a fabrication, he spits. A forged document. This woman, he grabs Katie's arm, his fingers digging hard enough to leave marks. This woman assaulted my patient 3 days ago. She was terminated for unlicensed practice. She's a disgraced nurse with delusions of grandeur, and whatever that paper says, it's been falsified. His phone is already out, already dialing security. I'm calling this in. She's trespassing. She's a threat to patient safety. Get her out of my hospital right now. The Marine doesn't move. Mendoza is watching Katie, his chest heaving, blood pooling on his bandage, the heart monitor screaming. The refugee patient is still screaming in Arabic, the words pouring out like a prayer, Al-Shaba al-Zaka, Al-Shaba al-Zaka. The other nurses have gone silent, standing frozen between the monitors and the beds, watching a woman they thought they knew transform into something else entirely. The resident is pale, backing toward the wall. And Katie stands perfectly still, her hand moving unconsciously to her jacket, to the place where the patch is sewn into the lining. The faded 75th Ranger Regiment insignia. 14 years of burial. 14 years of invisibility. All of it bleeding out into the fluorescent light. Then the ICU doors open. The sound is soft, just a whisper of hydraulic hinges, but every active duty person in the room snaps to attention like they've been electrified. A 2-star general stands in the doorway, his dress uniform immaculate, his ribbons arranged in perfect order. Combat Infantryman badge. 3 bronze stars. Master parachutist. His aide follows 2 steps behind, a Navy commander with the kind of bearing that suggests she's watched wars through a tactical computer screen and made decisions that changed continents. The general's eyes sweep the room once, taking in the chaos, the screaming patient, the bleeding ranger, the desperate doctor on his phone, the woman with blood under her fingernails and a faded patch sewn inside her jacket. He understands the entire story in one glance. His boots echo on tile. 1, 2, 3, 4. He stops directly in front of Katie and the Marine escort steps forward, his voice shaking. "Sir, this is Captain Catherine Morrison. 75th Ranger Regiment. She served 3 combat deployments. She commanded a human extraction team in. The silence is so thick you could operate in it. The silence is so thick you could operate in it." Then the doors to the ICU burst open and the 2-star general enters in dress uniform, his boots striking the tile with the sound of authority itself, and every active duty person in that corridor snaps to attention like their spines have been rewired. His aide carries a leather portfolio. The ICU nurses freeze mid-stride. The monitors keep their rhythm, the ventilators keep their wheeze, but the room has shifted on its axis. General Holloway's eyes scan the space until they land on Katie standing near Mendoza's bed, still in her scrubs, her volunteer badge clipped to her collar like an apology she shouldn't have to wear. He walks toward her with the kind of measured pace that makes admirals nervous. His hand rises. Not to shake hers. To salute. A 2-star salutes a captain. The room understands what this means before anyone speaks. His hand comes to his forehead and holds there for 3 full seconds while every officer in the ICU processes the mathematics of rank and recognition. Katie's right hand rises to meet the salute. Her jacket has shifted slightly when she moved, and there it is, visible for the first time in Cedar Creek Medical's fluorescent glare, the faded 75th Ranger Regiment patch sewn inside her jacket lining, the one she's carried like a ghost for 7 years. Holloway's aide steps forward and opens the portfolio. Inside is a citation laminated in military blue, the words printed in the stark serif of official Pentagon documents. Captain Catherine Morrison. Favela under fire. For tactical leadership during Operation Falcon's Nest in Tikrit. For extracting 12 civilians from a compound rated by JSOC as 0 survival probability. For taking hostile fire and continuing the operation. For commanding with the kind of composure that only comes from soldiers who understand that death is just the baseline and everything else is a miracle. The citation lists medals like a rosary of survival. Bronze Star. Silver Star. 2 Purple Hearts. Naval Commendation with Combat V. The words blur because everyone in that ICU is reading the same document at the same time and understanding that Dr. Pierce has spent 48 hours trying to discredit a woman whose tactical decisions are classified at the presidential level. Dr. Pierce's face has gone the color of hospital linoleum. His mouth opens. Nothing emerges. What he does next is a last-ditch scramble. He pulls out his phone and starts dialing, his fingers shaking as he tries to reach someone, anyone who can salvage this. But the general is already on his radio, and what happens next moves faster than Pierce's shaking hands can track. 2 FBI agents appear in the ICU doorway within 90 seconds. They are not there for Katie. They're there for him. The lead agent, a woman with eyes like a prosecutor's closing argument, walks directly to Pierce and reads him his rights with the mechanical precision of someone who has done this before. The arrest warrant is for healthcare fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty. She places her hand on his shoulder and suddenly the king of Cedar Creek Medical is in handcuffs. His wrists click into restraints with a sound like a chess piece moving into checkmate. The agent guides him toward the exit while hospital administrators watch from the doorway, their faces a synchronized study in horror and damage control. What they didn't know was already unfolding in the federal building 12 blocks away. The moment General Holloway's aide had made a single phone call to the Pentagon's Inspector General office, automated flags had triggered in every government database connected to Cedar Creek Medical's billing systems. They'd sent auditors in 3 hours later. Those auditors had found 18 months of phantom chemotherapy treatments, patients billed for infusions they never received, dosage records that didn't match purchase orders, insurance claims that existed only in Pierce's carefully fabricated documentation. The investigation had expanded like a stain. $53,000 in kickbacks from pharmaceutical suppliers. Inflated claims totaling $3.2 million. Consultants who didn't exist. Procedures that never happened. Equipment purchased and immediately resold. The paper trail was so detailed, so methodical, that the auditors realized Pierce had been running this operation like a business model, systematic, profitable, and absolutely federal prison material. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had taken over within 6 hours. By the time those agents placed him in handcuffs in the ICU, they already had 17 counts of fraud ready to file. By the time the hospital's legal team seized his office computers, they found encrypted files documenting 6 years of the same scheme at his previous hospital in Atlanta. By the time his attorney called, that previous hospital was already conducting an audit that would ultimately reveal another $2.1 million in fraudulent claims. Dr. Pierce sits in federal detention for 3 weeks before his bail hearing. The board members he'd called in favors from are now hiring their own attorneys, moving as quickly as distance themselves from his shadow. The hospital's insurance carrier threatens a lawsuit. The state medical board suspends his license pending criminal trial. And Dr. Pierce, the man who tried to erase Captain Catherine Morrison by building a case for practicing outside her scope, pleads guilty to 15 counts of healthcare fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. 9 months in federal prison at a facility in South Carolina. Supervised release for 5 years. Permanent revocation of his medical license. $100,000 in fines he'll never be able to pay. He gets out on a Tuesday morning in March and the world has moved on without him. Cedar Creek Medical has already reinstated Katie with back pay, a formal written apology from the hospital CEO, and an offer to design and lead a new patient advocacy program, a program that will eventually become the model for 3 other hospitals in the state. Mendoza recovers over the course of 6 weeks, his chest wound closing with the kind of healing that only happens when a trained operator stops the bleeding before the clock runs out. Katie visits him daily, bringing him coffee that's slightly better than hospital coffee, and he tells her stories about Tikrit that only someone who was there would understand, the way the dust tasted like metal, the way voices sounded different when adrenaline was in your system, the way she'd moved through that compound like she could see the bullets coming. The Iraqi refugee patient, the one who'd screamed the Blue Ghost's name across the ICU, asks for a meeting before his transfer. He's trembling when Katie walks in, and he speaks in broken English about being part of a Tikrit cell, about the night the Americans came, about the woman who moved like death itself. Katie listens without interrupting. Then she tells him through a translator, "We were both soldiers. We were both doing what we thought was right. Now we're both trying to heal." The man weeps quietly at this mercy, this generosity, this refusal to let him remain an enemy. The hospital throws a reinstatement ceremony with the administrator, the chief nursing officer, and a local news crew that Katie declines to participate in. She stands at the back of the room in her dress uniform, the first time she's worn it in 7 years, and when they call her name, she nods once, just once, from the back row. She doesn't join them on the stage. She doesn't accept the plaque. She doesn't speak. The nod is the entire statement. 9 months later, Katie is walking through Coastal Community College's nursing building for a recruitment event when she passes an open classroom door. Inside, a man in a wrinkled dress shirt is demonstrating chest compressions on a rubber dummy. His hands are shaking. The teenagers in the room look bored, scrolling phones, waiting for the class to end. The man's voice is uncertain as he counts compressions aloud, his eyes on the dummy rather than his students. He's 54 years old and teaching CPR certification for $14 an hour. He's 54 years old and nobody in this room knows who he is, and that anonymity is its own kind of death. Katie recognizes him immediately. Dr. Pierce. The man who tried to erase her, who called the state medical board, who built a case for assault, who had security escort her from Cedar Creek Medical. He's thinner than she remembers. His hands shake in a way that suggests nights without sleep, days without purpose, mornings without the institutional authority that once made him feel like a god. Katie stands in the doorway wearing her Chief of Staff badge, the new position Cedar Creek Medical offered her 4 months ago, and she simply waits. 30 seconds. 60 seconds. And then he looks up from the rubber dummy and sees her. His hands freeze mid-compression. For 5 full seconds they lock eyes across the classroom, the man who tried to destroy her career and the woman who survived being erased from official records by an entire military bureaucracy. She doesn't speak. She doesn't smile. She just lets him see the badge, lets him understand that while he teaches CPR to bored teenagers for $14 an hour, she's running the oncology program he once corrupted, she's designing patient safety initiatives, she's rebuilding Cedar Creek Medical into a hospital where nurses aren't isolated and doctors aren't criminals. Then she turns with the same cold precision as that day in the break room, her boots echoing the identical rhythm on the tile floor, 1, 2, 3, 4, and walks away. The sound follows her down the corridor. Pierce's hands are still shaking when she disappears. One of the teenagers asks if he's okay and he can't answer. That evening, Katie sits with Mendoza in the hospital cafeteria, fully recovered now, cleared for light duty in 2 weeks. He's asking about her future, whether she'll ever go back to active service, whether the Pentagon will call her back in. Katie touches the patch inside her jacket, the faded 75th Ranger Regiment insignia that's never left her in 7 years. I never left, she tells him. I just changed uniforms. He nods, understanding in a way only another soldier could. Because he knows what that means. It means the invisibility ends here. It means the captain is back in the light. It means when Katie Morrison walks into the oncology ward tomorrow morning, the nurses will stand when she passes, not because they have to, but because they finally understand who they're standing for. Hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'm curious, comment below and tell us if you're watching this alone or with family. Now let's see how this unfolds.